The winter wind cut through Margaret's thin shawl like a blade as she stood at the edge of Samuel Garrett's property, her 6-year-old son Thomas clinging to her skirts. 3 months since cholera took her husband. 2 weeks since the bank seized their homestead. 1 day since they'd eaten anything but wild berries. "Mama, I'm cold," Thomas whispered, his lips tinged blue. Margaret knocked on the farmhouse door with trembling fingers, rehearsing the words she'd practiced all morning. When the door swung open, she found herself looking up at a man whose broad shoulders nearly filled the doorframe. Samuel Garrett had the weathered face of someone who'd spent decades under the Montana sun. Brown eyes that assessed her with unexpected gentleness, and arms thick with muscle from years of working the land alone. "Mrs. Patterson?" His voice was rough as gravel, but not unkind. "Heard about your troubles. Before we continue, I want to take a moment to ask you something important. If you're enjoying this story, would you please take a few seconds to subscribe to the channel and leave a like on this video? It truly means everything to us and motivates us to bring you more quality content like this. Also, I'd love to know, where are you listening from right now? Now, back to Margaret's story. "Mr. Garrett, then." She straightened her spine, forcing herself to meet his gaze. "I heard you're looking for help with the harvest. My son Thomas, he's young, but he's a hard worker, strong for his age." Samuel's eyes shifted to the boy, then back to her. "Your young son needs work," he said slowly. Then his gaze intensified. "And my bed needs you." The words hung in the frozen air between them. Margaret's cheeks flushed crimson, and she instinctively pulled Thomas closer. Her mind raced. She'd heard Samuel Garrett was a decent man, a widower himself for 5 years, respected in the community. But this, I won't," she stammered, preparing to turn away despite their desperate situation. "Wait." He held up a calloused hand, his expression shifting to something like regret. "That came out wrong, Mrs. Patterson. What I mean is, I need a housekeeper. Someone to cook, mend, keep the house while I work the fields. The spare room off the kitchen has a good bed. It needs someone in it, someone who can make this place a home, again. Your boy can help with light chores, feeding chickens, collecting eggs. But I'm offering you both shelter, food, and wages. Proper wages, nothing more." Margaret studied his face, searching for deception and finding only awkward earnestness. "You're offering us employment? That's all?" "That's all." He stepped back, opening the door wider. "Though I won't lie, this house has been cold and empty since my Sarah passed. Could use the sound of life in it again. But you'll have your privacy, your dignity. I give you my word." She glanced down at Thomas, whose small body was shaking with cold. Then at the warm glow of the fireplace, visible behind Samuel. What choice did she have? "1-month trial," she said firmly. "If either of us is unhappy, we leave with no questions asked." "Fair enough." He nodded. "Come in out of the cold. I'll make coffee." The first week passed in careful silence. Margaret rose before dawn to prepare breakfast: sourdough biscuits, bacon, and strong coffee. Then spent her days scrubbing floors that hadn't been properly cleaned in years, mending shirts with more holes than fabric, and teaching Thomas to gather eggs without frightening the hens. Samuel worked from sunrise to sunset, speaking only when necessary, eating her meals with quiet appreciation. She noticed things about him: the way he always removed his boots before entering, tracking no mud on her clean floors; how he'd carved a small horse from wood and left it on Thomas's pillow. The gentle way he handled the injured calf in the barn, splinting its leg with infinite patience. "You're good with animals," she commented one evening, watching him feed the calf with a bottle. "Animals are honest," he replied, without looking up. "They don't pretend to be something they're not. Unlike people," he met her eyes then. "Unlike some people. Your husband, was he good to you?" The question caught her off guard. "He was adequate. He married me when my father needed the alliance. I learned not to expect warmth." Samuel's jaw tightened. A woman shouldn't have to settle for adequate. Something in his tone made her pulse quicken. She changed the subject. "How did your wife die?" "Fever. 5 years back." His voice went rough. "Happened fast. One day she was laughing at breakfast. 3 days later she was gone. I promised her I'd never let anyone replace her. Yet here I am." "You're not replacing anyone, Mrs. Patterson. You're filling an empty space. There's a difference." The turning point came during a spring storm that hit with unexpected violence. Margaret woke to Thomas screaming, his small body convulsing with fever. She ran to his room, finding him burning hot, delirious. "Mr. Garrett!" She didn't care about propriety, only terror. Samuel appeared instantly, still pulling on his shirt. He pressed a hand to Thomas's forehead and cursed. "Scarlet fever. Saw it take 3 children in town last month." "No." Margaret's voice broke. "Not him. Please God, not him too." "Listen to me." Samuel gripped her shoulders, forcing her to focus. "I'm riding to fetch Doc Stevens. You need to keep him cool. Wet cloths on his forehead, wrists, and neck. Make him drink water, even if he fights you. Do you understand?" She nodded, tears streaming. "Hurry." He was gone in minutes, riding his horse hard through the storm. Margaret spent the next hour in hell, watching her son's fever climb, his breathing grow shallow. She prayed and whispered fragments, bargaining with God, offering anything, everything. When Samuel returned with the doctor, dawn was breaking. Doc Stevens examined Thomas with practiced efficiency, then administered medicine and gave instructions. "The fever should break in the next few hours if the medicine works," he said gravely. "But it's going to be close, Margaret. You need to prepare yourself." "No." She shook her head fiercely. "He's going to live. He has to." The doctor left. Samuel stayed. He sat on the opposite side of Thomas's bed, helping her change the cool cloths, encouraging the boy to drink. His presence was solid, unshakable. "Why are you doing this?" she whispered as the sun rose. "You barely know us." "I know enough." His eyes were bloodshot from lack of sleep. "I know you're the bravest woman I've ever met. I know that boy is lucky to have you. And I know," he hesitated, then continued quietly, "I know what it's like to sit helpless, watching someone you care about slip away. You shouldn't have to do that alone." "You care about us?" Her voice was barely audible. "Yes." Simple, honest, devastating. At noon, Thomas's fever broke. His eyes fluttered open, clear for the first time in hours. "Mama," Margaret sobbed with relief, pulling him into a gentle embrace. Over his head, she met Samuel's gaze. He smiled, the first real smile she'd seen from him, and it transformed his entire face. "Thank you," she mouthed. He nodded, then quietly left the room to let them rest. After Thomas's recovery, something shifted between Margaret and Samuel. The careful distance they'd maintained began to dissolve. She found herself watching him work in the fields, admiring the strength in his movements. He began lingering at dinner, telling stories that made Thomas laugh and Margaret smile. One evening, teaching Thomas to whittle, Samuel accidentally sliced his palm open. Margaret insisted on bandaging it, her fingers gentle against his work-roughened skin. "Go slow," he murmured as she cleaned the wound. "It hurts." She met his eyes and saw something there that had nothing to do with the cut. Her hands trembled slightly as she wrapped the bandage. "I'd die before I hurt you," she whispered, though she wasn't entirely sure anymore if they were still talking about his hand. His fingers caught hers, calluses against softness. "Margaret, look!" Thomas's excited voice shattered the moment. "I didn't cut myself!" They pulled apart, both breathing too fast, but Samuel's gaze promised the conversation wasn't over. The real test came when Frank Hollis rode onto the property, with 2 hired guns flanking him. Margaret recognized him immediately, the banker who'd foreclosed on her homestead, a man with a reputation for acquiring land through intimidation and violence. "Mrs. Patterson," his smile was oily, "I've come to collect what's owed." Samuel said, stepping forward. "The debt died with her husband. The debt transfers to the widow. It's in the contract. Hollis pulled out papers. She owes me $300 or she comes work for me in town. I've got a position for a pretty widow." The implications were clear. Margaret's stomach turned. "She's under my protection now," Samuel said, his voice dropping to something dangerous. "You'll leave my property." "Your property," Hollis laughed. "You're behind on your mortgage too, Garrett. In fact, I'm prepared to be generous. Sign over your deed, and I'll forgive both debts." "No." Samuel's hand moved to the rifle leaning against the porch rail. "That's unfortunate." Hollis nodded to his men. "Boys." The 2 gunmen reached for their weapons. Samuel was faster. He grabbed his rifle and fired, sending one man's hat flying. The second gun froze. "Next shot won't miss," Samuel promised. "Margaret, take Thomas inside." "I'm not leaving you," she said fiercely, grabbing the shotgun from behind the door. She'd never fired a gun in her life, but she aimed it straight at Hollis with steady hands. "Well," Hollis's smile vanished. "Seems the widow has teeth." "You have 10 seconds to get off this land," Margaret said, surprised by the steel in her own voice. "Then I pull this trigger." Hollis studied her face and apparently saw she meant it. He turned his horse. "This isn't over, Garrett. I'll be back with the sheriff." "The sheriff's an honest man," Samuel replied. "Bring him. Bring everyone. These debts were paid years ago, and you know it. You're running a fraud, Hollis, and it ends today." After they left, Margaret lowered the shotgun with shaking hands. Samuel took it from her gently. "You were magnificent," he said. "I was terrified. Courage isn't the absence of fear. It's acting despite it." He touched her cheek, a feather-light brush of his thumb. "You're not property, Margaret. You're a person. A strong, incredible person. And I?" He swallowed hard. "I see a woman worth saving, worth fighting for, worth—" "Worth what?" she whispered. "Worth loving." The words hung between them like a vow. Margaret's breath caught. "Samuel, your promise to your wife." "Sarah would want me to be happy. She told me so in those last days, made me swear I wouldn't stop living just because she had to." His voice roughed with emotion. "I've been existing, not living, until you arrived. You and Thomas brought light back into this house, into my life. I know it's too soon. I know I'm probably a fool. But," she kissed him, stood on her toes and pressed her lips to his, silencing his doubts. He froze for a heartbeat, then pulled her close, one arm wrapping around her waist, while his bandaged hand cradled her face with infinite gentleness. When they broke apart, both were breathing hard. "I love you," she said simply. "I think I've loved you since you opened that door and offered us shelter, when you could have turned us away." "Together," he murmured against her forehead. "Whatever comes, we face it together." "Together," she agreed. The confrontation with Hollis came 2 weeks later. The banker arrived with the sheriff and a lawyer, demanding to inspect Samuel's mortgage papers. Samuel produced them immediately, fully paid, as he'd claimed, with stamps and signatures proving Hollis had been collecting fraudulent payments for years. "You'll be arrested," the sheriff told Hollis grimly. "How many others have you cheated?" As they led Hollis away, Margaret felt the last weight lift from her shoulders. She turned to Samuel. Finding him watching her with such open affection, it made her heart ache. That evening, after Thomas was asleep, Samuel took her hand and led her to the porch. The Montana sunset painted the sky in shades of gold and crimson. "I have something to ask you," he said, then dropped to one knee. Margaret's hands flew to her mouth. "I don't have a fancy ring or pretty words," Samuel continued, "but I have a home that needs you in it, a life that's better with you in it, a heart that belongs to you already. Margaret Patterson, will you marry me? Will you let me spend every day proving you made the right choice?" "Yes." She pulled him up, laughing and crying at once. "Yes, 1,000 times yes." He kissed her properly then, deep and thorough, a promise of all the days to come. They married 3 weeks later in the small church in town, with half the county attending. Thomas stood as ring-bearer, beaming with pride. When the Reverend pronounced them husband and wife, Samuel lifted Margaret off her feet and spun her around, drawing laughter from the congregation. At the reception, Doc Stevens pulled Margaret aside. "I've known Samuel for 20 years. Never thought he'd smile again after Sarah died. You brought him back to life." "He did the same for me," Margaret replied, watching her new husband teach Thomas to dance. That night, in the farmhouse that had become home, Samuel carried her over the threshold while Thomas giggled from his new room upstairs. "Nervous?" Samuel asked, setting her down gently. "A little." She touched his chest, feeling his heart pound. "It's been a long time since we have all the time in the world." He kissed her forehead, her cheeks, her lips. "We'll go as slow as you need. I'd die before I hurt you." "I know." She smiled, pulling him closer. "I trust you, Samuel, completely." They moved together into their bedroom, closing the door on the past and opening it on their future. 5 years later, Margaret stood on the porch, one hand resting on her swollen belly, watching Samuel teach Thomas, now 11, how to break a new horse. A 4-year-old girl with Samuel's brown eyes and Margaret's smile played at her feet, chattering to her rag doll. "Mama, is the baby coming soon?" little Sarah asked. Named for the woman who'd made her father promise to find happiness again. "Very soon, sweetheart." Samuel looked up from the corral, catching her eye. Even after 5 years, his gaze still made her breath catch. He smiled, that rare, beautiful smile he reserved for his family, and mouthed, "I love you." She pressed a hand to her heart, then pointed at him. "I love you too." Thomas successfully mounted the horse, and Samuel's whoop of pride carried across the yard. Their daughter squealed with delight. Margaret laughed, her heart so full she thought it might burst. This was what Samuel had offered that frozen day she'd knocked on his door. Not just shelter, Not just survival, but a life worth living. A love worth fighting for. A family forged from loneliness and loss into something beautiful and unbreakable. She'd come to him desperate, willing to trade anything for her son's safety. Instead, Samuel had seen her worth, her strength, her heart. He'd given her everything she'd never dared dream of, and in return, she'd given him the same. Together, they'd built a home. Together, they'd created a life. Together, they'd found their way from darkness into light. And that, Margaret thought as Samuel bounded up the porch steps to kiss her, was the greatest gift of all. The winter of their 6th year together brought challenges Margaret had never anticipated. The baby, a boy they'd named Daniel, was 3 months old when Samuel rode home with troubling news. "There's talk of a railroad coming through," he said, bouncing Daniel gently while Margaret kneaded bread dough. "Company's been buying up land along the proposed route, offering good money, but some folks are refusing to sell." "And those who refuse?" Margaret asked, though she already knew the answer from the tension in his jaw. "Mysterious fires, cattle poisoning. One family's well went bad overnight." Samuel's voice hardened. "They're trying to force people out." Thomas, now 12 and tall for his age, looked up from his schoolwork. "Will they come here, Pa?" Samuel met Margaret's eyes over their son's head. "Our land sits right in their path. If they follow the straightest route, they'll want to run tracks straight through our south pasture." That night, lying in bed with Daniel sleeping in his cradle nearby, Margaret traced the worry lines on Samuel's forehead. "What are you thinking?" "I'm thinking about what you said once, that together we can face anything." He caught her hand, pressing a kiss to her palm. "I built this place with my own hands, Margaret. Every fence post, every beam in this house. Sarah and I cleared the rocks from those fields. And then you came, and you made it a home again. I can't just let them take it." "Then we fight," she said simply. "Together." His arms tightened around her. "I don't deserve you." "Yes, you do." She kissed him softly. "You deserve every bit of happiness you have, Samuel Garrett, and we'll protect it." The railroad men came on a Tuesday morning, 3 of them in expensive suits, flanked by hired muscle. Their leader, a man named Cyrus Blackwood, had the smile of a snake and eyes like chips of ice. "Mr. Garrett, Mrs. Garrett." He tipped his hat with exaggerated courtesy. "I'm here to make you a very generous offer for your property." "Not interested," Samuel said from the porch, his rifle within easy reach. "You haven't heard the offer yet." Blackwood's smile didn't waver. $5,000. That's more than this dirt farm is worth 10 times over. This isn't a dirt farm. It's our home. Margaret stepped forward, Daniel in her arms. "And it's not for sale at any price." Blackwood's gaze swept over her with an assessment that made her skin crawl. "Mrs. Garrett, surely you can convince your husband to be reasonable. A woman of your refinement shouldn't be wasting away on a frontier farm. With that kind of money, you could go back east, live in society." "I have everything I need right here," Margaret replied coldly. "How unfortunate." Blackwood's smile finally faded. "You see, the railroad is coming through, whether you cooperate or not. The question is whether you profit from it or lose everything. I'd hate to see your lovely home suffer an accident." Samuel moved so fast Blackwood barely had time to flinch. One moment, Samuel was on the porch. The next, he had Blackwood by the collar, lifting him slightly off the ground, despite the man's struggles. "Let me make something clear," Samuel said, his voice deadly quiet. "You threaten my family again, and I'll break every bone in your body." slowly. Do you understand? You're assaulting me, Blackwood sputtered. My men! Your men know better than to draw on me. Samuel's gaze flicked to the hired guns, who'd made no move to intervene. They're smart enough to recognize when they're outmatched. Are you? He released Blackwood, who stumbled backward, straightening his jacket with shaking hands. This isn't over, Garrett. No, Samuel agreed. It's not. But next time you set foot on my property, you'd better be prepared to defend yourself. Now get out. After they left, Margaret found her hands trembling as she tried to soothe Daniel. Samuel noticed and pulled her close, wrapping them both in his strong arms. I won't let anyone hurt our family, he murmured into her hair. I swear it. I know. She leaned into his strength. But Samuel, these men, they're not like Frank Hollis. They have money, connections, power. And we have something they don't. He tilted her chin up, his gaze intense. We have everything worth fighting for. That makes us more dangerous than they'll ever be. The attacks started small. A section of fence, cut in the night, letting cattle wander. Spoiled grain in the feed shed. A grass fire that nearly spread to the barn before Samuel and Thomas managed to beat it out. Margaret organized the family like a military campaign. She taught Thomas and even young Sarah to watch for strangers, to note unfamiliar horses or movements in the distance. She learned to shoot properly, spending hours practicing until she could hit a target at 50 yards. At night, they took turns keeping watch. Mama's getting really good with that rifle, Sarah observed one evening, watching her mother reload with practiced efficiency. Your mama's always been a fighter, Samuel said proudly. She just needed the right tools. The real confrontation came on a moonless night. Margaret was on watch, walking the perimeter of the house with a lantern and her rifle, when she heard horses approaching. Multiple horses. She didn't hesitate. She fired one shot in the air, their agreed signal, then extinguished her lantern and dropped behind the water trough. Within seconds, Samuel burst from the house, rifle in hand, positioning himself at the corner with a clear line of sight. Thomas appeared at an upstairs window, his own rifle trained on the approaching riders. That's far enough, Samuel's voice rang out across the darkness. State your business or leave. We're here on behalf of the railroad, a voice called back. Mr. Blackwood wants. I know what Blackwood wants. The answer's still no. Then we're here to persuade you differently. The gunfire started without further warning. Margaret heard bullets slam into the house, splinter fence posts, shatter a window. She waited, counting muzzle flashes to determine positions, then returned fire with careful precision. She'd learned from Samuel never to waste ammunition on wild shots. One attacker yelped in pain. She'd hit something. Samuel's rifle barked steadily, methodical and deadly. From upstairs, Thomas fired less frequently, but with good judgment, taking time to aim. Fall back, someone yelled. They're ready for us. The horses thundered away into the darkness. When silence fell, Margaret's ears rang from the gunfire. She stayed hidden, waiting, until Samuel called out. It's clear, Margaret? Here. She stood on shaking legs, suddenly aware of how close they'd come to disaster. Thomas? I'm okay, Ma. His young voice was excited rather than frightened. I think I hit one. Samuel appeared at her side, pulling her against him roughly. You could have been killed. When I heard that first shot, I fired the signal just like we planned. She pressed her face to his chest, feeling his heart pound. We drove them off together, Samuel, just like everything else. Together, he repeated hoarsely. God, Margaret, I can't lose you. You won't, she pulled back to look at him. I'm not going anywhere. This is our land, our home. They'll have to kill us all to take it, and we're too stubborn to die." He laughed, a slightly wild sound, and kissed her hard. "Damn right we are." The next morning, they found blood trails leading away from the property and 4 spent bullet casings near the barn. The sheriff rode out that afternoon, a grim expression on his weathered face. "Heard there was trouble," Sheriff Morrison said, examining the damage. "Blackwood's men tried to run us off our land," Samuel explained. "We defended ourselves." "Uh-huh." The sheriff's eyes took in the strategic positions, the careful sight lines. "Looks like you did more than defend. Looks like you were ready for a siege." "We learned from last time," Margaret interjected. "When Frank Hollis came after us, we were unprepared. We won't make that mistake again." Morrison studied her for a long moment. "You've changed, Mrs. Garrett. When you first came to town, you looked like a scared rabbit. Now?" He shook his head. "Now you look like someone I wouldn't want to cross." "I found my strength," Margaret said simply, taking Samuel's hand. "And someone worth being strong for." The sheriff sighed. "Look, I'll talk to Blackwood. Tell him he needs to back off or face charges. But the railroad has powerful friends, Samuel." "This might not end the way you want." "Then we'll face that when it comes," Samuel replied. "But we're not leaving." After Morrison left, Thomas approached his parents hesitantly. "Pa, what if they come back with more men? What if we can't hold them off next time?" Samuel crouched to his son's level. "Then we'll find another way. But here's what I want you to understand, son. This land isn't just dirt and grass. It's every drop of sweat we've poured into it. It's where your sister Sarah is buried." His voice caught. Samuel's first daughter, who died of fever, rested in the family plot on the hill. It's where baby Daniel took his first breath. It's where your mother and I built our life together. Some things are worth fighting for, even when the odds aren't in your favor. "I understand, Pa." Thomas straightened. "I'll fight too. I know you will, son. You already have." Margaret watched the exchange with tears in her eyes. This was what she'd given her children, not just survival, but something to believe in, a father who taught them courage and principle, a home that meant more than 4 walls and a roof. That night, as she nursed Daniel, while Samuel read to Sarah from her favorite book of fairy tales, Margaret marveled at how far they'd come. 6 years ago, she'd knocked on this door, desperate and broken, willing to trade anything for her son's safety. Now she'd trade anything to keep what they'd built, and she knew Samuel felt the same. The resolution came from an unexpected source. 3 days after the attack, a telegraph arrived from the territorial governor's office, requesting Samuel's presence in Helena. Margaret insisted on coming with him, leaving the children with Doc Stevens and his wife. They arrived to find Cyrus Blackwood already in the governor's office, his face mottled with fury. The governor, a stern man named Potts, gestured them to seats. "Mr. Garrett, I've received disturbing reports about the railroad's land acquisition methods," Potts began. "I've also received a petition signed by 47 homesteaders, complaining of intimidation, property damage, and threats from railroad representatives." "All lies," Blackwood exploded. "These frontier rabble are standing in the way of progress." "Is it a lie that your men attacked my family in the night?" Samuel's voice was dangerously calm. "Is it a lie that you threatened my wife?" "I made a business offer that you refused to consider reasonably." "You threatened our home." Margaret spoke for the first time, her voice cutting through Blackwood's bluster. "You tried to drive us off land we've earned through years of hard work. You sent armed men to terrorize us. And we're not the only ones." She pulled papers from her satchel, statements she'd collected from neighboring families, all detailing similar threats and attacks. She'd spent the last 3 days riding from farm to farm, gathering evidence. Governor Potts read through them, his expression darkening. "Mr. Blackwood, I'm inclined to revoke the railroad's charter for this territory, unless you can provide evidence refuting these claims." "You can't do that. We have investors, contracts." "I can and will if necessary." Potts turned to Samuel and Margaret. "However, I'm also aware that the railroad would bring significant economic benefits to the territory. Is there a compromise to be found here?" Samuel and Margaret exchanged a long look. That silent communication they'd developed over years of partnership. "The railroad can go around our property," Margaret said finally. "It'll add perhaps 2 miles to the route, running along the ridge instead of through the valley. The families who wish to sell can still do so. Those of us who want to stay, stay." "That's inefficient and costly," Blackwood protested. "That's the offer," Samuel said flatly. "Take it or lose your charter. Your choice." Potts smiled slightly. "I think that's a fair compromise. Mr. Blackwood?" The railroad man's jaw worked silently for a moment. Finally, he spat out, "Fine, we'll reroute. And there will be no further harassment of the homesteaders," Potts added. "Any future complaints and I'll investigate personally. Are we clear? Crystal." Blackwood stood abruptly, glaring at Samuel and Margaret. "You've made powerful enemies today." "We've faced worse," Margaret replied coolly, "and we're still here." After Blackwood stormed out, Governor Potts shook both their hands. "That took courage, standing up to him. And Mrs. Garrett, that documentation was invaluable. You have a sharp mind." "I learned from the best," she said, smiling at Samuel. On the train ride home, Samuel pulled Margaret close, kissing her temple. "You were magnificent in there. The way you presented that evidence, the way you spoke to the governor. You could have been a lawyer." "I'm happy being a farmer's wife," she replied. "Though I'll admit, it felt good to use my brain for something besides planning meals and mending clothes." "You use your brain for a lot more than that." He tilted her chin up. "You're the smartest person I know, Margaret, and the bravest, and the most beautiful." He kissed her softly. "How did I get so lucky?" "We both got lucky." She nestled against his chest. "That day I knocked on your door, I was looking for survival. I found everything else instead." "I wasn't looking for anything," Samuel admitted. "I'd given up on happiness. Then you appeared, and suddenly I had reasons to smile again, reasons to fight, reasons to hope." "Together," she whispered, the word that had become their promise, their prayer, their covenant. "Together," he agreed, holding her as the train carried them home. When they arrived back at the farm, their children rushed out to greet them, Daniel in Thomas's arms, Sarah jumping up and down with excitement. Samuel scooped his daughter up while Margaret hugged Thomas and took the baby. "Did you win, Mama?" Sarah asked eagerly. "Did you beat the bad men?" "We did, sweetheart." Margaret looked at her family, at the home they'd defended, at the land stretching out around them golden in the setting sun. "We won." That night, after the children were asleep, Samuel found Margaret on the porch, staring up at the stars. "Having thoughts?" he asked, wrapping his arms around her from behind. "Just thinking about everything we've been through. The struggles, the fights, the victories." She leaned back against his solid warmth. "I wouldn't change a moment of it." "Not even the hard parts?" "Especially not the hard parts. They made us who we are." She turned in his arms. "Samuel Garrett, you took a desperate widow and her frightened child and gave us everything. A home, a family, a life worth living. But more than that, you saw who I could become and helped me become her. You were always strong, Margaret. You just needed a safe place to show it. He cupped her face gently. And you gave me just as much. You brought light back into my darkness. You gave me children who fill this house with laughter. You made me whole again. We made each other whole, she corrected. That's what love does. He kissed her then, deep and passionate, the kiss of a man who'd found his home in another person. When they broke apart, both were breathing hard. Come to bed, Samuel murmured against her lips. I want to show you exactly how grateful I am for every single day with you. Margaret laughed, taking his hand. Is that so? Oh, yes. His eyes darkened with promise. I plan to be very thorough about it. They went inside together, closing the door on the night, on the battles behind them, on the uncertain future ahead. None of it mattered as much as this, the two of them, together, building a life, one day, one choice, one kiss at a time. Outside, the Montana stars wheeled overhead, constant and eternal, as the love that had transformed two broken people into an unbreakable whole. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I'd love to know where you're enjoying this tale from. Are you listening at home, during your commute, or perhaps while working? Please subscribe to the From Wild West channel and share your thoughts in the comments below. What did you think of Margaret and Samuel's journey? Your feedback means the world to us.